The Arctic, a vast, forbidding wilderness. Few regions in the world have inspired greater awe than its iciest reaches. Devon Island is such a place, a cold desert at the top of the world. On the sea ice, predator and prey have battled here for thousands of years. But their battleground is melting. An icebound sanctuary for Arctic creatures is under threat. Devon Island is remote from the world most of us know. But what happens here affects us all. This is a voyage of exploration through an island of ice. Devon Island, in the Canadian Arctic archipelago, is the world's largest uninhabited island. It appears barren and is too harsh for most life forms. But not for the Arctic's apex predator, supremely adapted to this landscape. The ice itself is like a creature, developing, transforming, and perishing. Its darkest corners tell stories of the forces that have formed our planet and how we are forming it now. For 9 months of the year, Devon Island's weather is far below freezing. Temperatures hover above freezing in what passes for summer here. Most of its surface is frost-fractured rock. Few creatures or plants can survive here. Devon Island is so barren and hostile that NASA has used its blasted terrain to mimic the exploration of Mars. An ice cap tops the island's mountainous peak. The core of this massive dome formed 100,000 years ago. Now it spreads over 14,000 square kilometers. It has grown from accumulated snow, increasing in density, becoming compacted, and hardening into ice. In places, the ice reaches 880 meters deep. There may be an abundance of frozen water, but Devon Island is a desert. It rarely snows, and rainfall is comparable to the Gobi Desert. What little falls freezes and keeps adding to the ice cap. From the ice cap flow 14 glaciers, which slide down the island's rocky terrain towards the sea. The glaciers reach the island's edge, thrusting onwards. Massive blocks of ice break off and topple into the Arctic Ocean as icebergs. For 6 months of the year, darkness dominates this frozen land. During winter, the surrounding sea is covered in continuous solid ice. When the sun returns in spring, it won't set for 4 months. The unrelenting light warms this frozen desert. The ice begins to move. Shifting sea ice on the water ruptures with long cracks called leads. Prevailing winds and currents determine where the leads will form, often in the same area every year. These leads shape avenues for seals to come up for air. It's spring. The seals don't have to work as hard to maintain their breathing holes. In fall, when the ice is thin, the seals cut holes with the sharp claws on their foreflippers. The harp seal uses as many as 15 holes, swimming between them and pushing its head through to keep them open. Now it's spring, and the sun is up. They can bask on the ice. But they stay alert for polar bears. The polar bear has roamed the sea ice in darkness all winter. Greenland Inuit call the polar bear Pisuktuk, the Great Wanderer. Pausing only to sleep, it stays on the prowl in an unceasing search for seals. In this region, a polar bear's home territory can cover 60,000 square kilometers. This stretch of sea ice along Devon Island is called the Polar Bear Highway, where about 1,600 travel back and forth. Scanning the horizon, it's not unusual to see up to 10 stalking for prey. A pregnant female stays put over the winter, nestling in a den on land. In spring, she and her cub emerge, ravenous. For over 4 months, a cub has only known the warm huddle of the den and its mother's milk. Now the world opens up, and the mother will teach it to survive in the Arctic expanse. Winds and currents gather and grow stronger. The clash of gigantic ice sheets forces up ridges. Underneath is air and open water. Seals have a lifeline for breath. And polar bears have an avenue for their hunt. A polar bear can scent a seal up to 16 kilometers away. It can target a seal lair beneath a meter of snow. And it's powerful enough to break through the thick ice. Seals must emerge to breathe every 15 minutes. When the hunting is good, a polar bear will only eat a seal's blubber and skin. It can eat 45 kilos of blubber in one sitting. This bear could lurk around a promising breathing hole for days. Devon Island doesn't seem like a place humans would like to visit. But scientists are arriving from the University of Alberta, Canada. It's taken 14 months to plan this trip and prepare for the difficulties Devon Island will present. They visit at the start of summer, when the 24-hour days are brightest.
Yeah, especially after a few days.
In a couple of months, the accumulated warmth of the relentless, glaring sunlight on snow will stir up fog, and on the heights of the ice cap, the sun can trigger an avalanche. In the early spring of 2015, 2 Dutch researchers collecting data on sea ice nearby fell through an unexpectedly thin patch and died. Earth and atmospheric scientist Dr. Martin Sharp and graduate student Ashley Dubnick are here to examine one of nature's laboratories for processing water and ice. What they study here has worldwide implications.
Glaciers are probably the most important control on the average level of the global ocean. So they represent a large storage of water on the continents, and if they melt, then that water ends up in the ocean, and sea level rises. So big cities like New York, millions of people vulnerable to rising sea levels. It's such a big problem, probably over 100 million people live within a meter of current sea level elevation, and trillions of dollars of infrastructure located in the same region. It's a problem we're going to have to confront. I guess there's 2 ways to look at this. You can either let it happen and figure out how you deal with it, or you think it might be better to stop it happening.
If the Devon Island ice cap were to melt completely, it would raise the levels of all the world's seas by about 10 millimeters. It doesn't sound like much, but this is 1 fraction of the Arctic's melting ice. The ice cap here has been steadily shrinking since 1985, shedding its water into the world's oceans. By the end of this century, sea level is expected to rise by ½ a meter. Hundreds of millions of homes would disappear, and great cities such as Mumbai or downtown New York would be in grave danger of flooding. Martin and his team plan to visit the underbelly of one of the glaciers flowing from the ice cap. They want to examine basal ice at the foundation of a glacier, where it interacts with the ground beneath and meltwater gathers. They have a 2-hour journey across a landscape slashed by deep crevasses that crack into the ice as the glacier moves downhill. In summer, water from melting snow and ice courses down these crevasses, running to the bottom of the glacier. Then it streams along channels between bedrock and ice, following the glacier's course to the sea. Martin and his team will be traveling over uneven, slippery terrain in unpredictable weather. It's a risky venture.
Yeah.
They'll plot their course with satellite images, aerial photography, and GPS. Technology can guide them, but they'll still have to pick their way around the hazards. The difficulty and risks seem less important in the magnificence that surrounds them.
I certainly feel an affinity to glaciers and ice sheets. I've worked on them most of my life. I think they're remarkable places to spend time, partly because of the isolation. Chance to think that you don't get where everything's very rushed. And I just think they're an important part of the global environment. I think we have a responsibility as a community to protect and preserve all of those parts of the global system.
Martin and Ashley arrive at the underside of the glacier. They're not sure what they'll find. They follow a passage down, which leads to an ice cave. This has been carved by meltwater streaming down and dissolving the edge of the glacier. In late summer, chunks of ice tumble down and their meltwater flows into these caves. At summer's end, torrents of water flood through, making it too dangerous to visit. This channel reveals a cross-section of the glacial wall over 9 meters high. The bands in the curving wall of ice were formed in different years. They're lighter or darker according to how much debris was in the meltwater that flowed down here, then froze again. The glacier's underbelly tells a traveler's tale of 10,000 years. Some years, the glacier scraped over rough terrain, captured rocks, and dragged them along with it. But there's more. They find bird feathers, mosses, and the shells of marine mollusks caught in the ice.
You see the striation on the surface of the shell.
The shells are remnants of a brief warm period 9,000 years ago. The warm weather melted the lower reaches of the ice cap. The Arctic Ocean then deluged Devon Island's valleys. When the climate chilled again, the sea retreated, and the glaciers advanced down the island, overriding the shells. The team discovers another, more fragile relic from the same warm period. A blade of grass. When the sea flooded these valleys, lush vegetation flourished on the hillsides of Devon Island. The returning glaciers crushed the plants and swept them along. A blade of grass 9,000 years old would not normally be found as a damp stem like this. Martin and Ashley ventured deeper into the cave.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Ice crystals formed by condensation cover the walls.
Well, that's great. This incredible array of crystal structures on the surface. Perfect hexagonal ice crystals, which is just, breathtaking. Like you're walking through a world of crystals. Never seen anything like it anywhere else.
Ice crystals form around particles of grit or earth. Water vapor attaches to it and freezes in facets that reflect the structure of the water molecule. Then the crystal grows from the edges in branches, just like a snowflake. Martin and Ashley moved deeper under the glacier. Here the ice above their heads is more than 15 meters thick.
Go ahead, Martin.
They're now about 300 meters in. Alien territory, further than they've ever been.
Things dripping there. Yeah, there's actually water there.
Martin is surprised to find water originating here. Heat rising from the Earth's crust has warmed the cavern.
In the late 1980s, the sort of mantra was that it's cold, dark, and there's no life there. There always seemed to be a scientist in the back of the room who'd say, well, there's got to be microbes. And I thought, well, really, we ought to have a look.
When this water is analyzed, it confirms Martin's suspicions. It houses as many microbes as ordinary surface water anywhere on Earth. Microbes are single-cell organisms, the world's oldest life form. There are as many on a person's hand as there are people in the world. But most scientists didn't think they could live in a glacier. The microbes don't all come from the surface. Generations of them have lived in the glacier for thousands of years. surviving mostly by feeding on the buried, decaying vegetation that included the blade of grass. Martin and Ashley's find confirms a growing understanding that glaciers contain many living microorganisms. This frozen ecosystem is constantly in motion. The massive glacier forces its way to the edge of the island. Here, it finally collapses into the ocean in one of nature's greatest spectacles, the calving of icebergs. This berg from Devon Island begins its long journey by slipping into the shifting contours of an Arctic marvel. It enters a remarkable body of water that baffles scientists, the North Water Polynya. It's an expanse of Arctic Ocean between Canada and Greenland that stays free of ice all year, even in the darkest, coldest months of winter. The phenomenon is mysterious. Theories include swift surface currents and cyclones that pull ice away from the sea. The Polynya provides a haven for creatures to rest and feed in a sea otherwise locked in by ice. Thousands of thick-billed murres gather here in summer to nest and raise their young on precipitous ledges. The female lays one egg in a breeding season. It's pointed at one end, which stops it rolling off a cliff edge. Instead, it spins on the spot. Murres dance around the cliff face with ease, but their most natural element is the sea. Murres dive deeper than almost any other bird to seize their prey and can stay underwater for 4 minutes. By the end of summer, when the chicks have fledged, the cliff face colony is deserted. The murres migrate south and spend all winter in the North Atlantic. Bowhead whales find a sanctuary in the Polynya for breeding. For 300 years, commercial whalers inflicted mass slaughter on bowheads. The devastation was greatest in the northeastern Arctic Ocean. The whaling industry ended a century ago. When there were so few bowheads left, it was no longer profitable to pursue them. Populations in other parts of the Arctic have recovered. Around this region, though, they were feared to still be irreparably damaged. Scientists have been pleased to find the number of bowheads here finally growing. The sociable walrus congregates here too. These mammals may lumber on land, but they swim elegantly underwater, where they can stay for 30 minutes before surfacing for air. A mother gives birth to a calf in seclusion, but soon rejoins the herd, cradling her baby as a human mother would. As polar ice thins, walruses lose their floating staging posts where they can rest or launch a hunt. They've been congregating in unusual numbers on shorelines, far from their prey. Inuits say that walrus can predict weather. One elder said, "The walrus will go when there is going to be strong winds blowing soon." In every herd of walruses, one will act as a lookout for predators, braying an alarm. Polar bears stalk the waters of the Polynya, looking for seals and birds. They're powerful and dauntless. The bear is not the only hunter here. A group of Inuit has crossed the sea ice to Devon from neighboring Cornwallis Island in search of seal to feed their community, following a hunting tradition thousands of years old. Mark Amarualik has been coming to Devon Island since he was a child.
Good way I found out what size of a polar bear you put your boot print in it. That's about an 8-9 footer right there for a polar bear track.
Mark has learned through generations how to observe the polar bear. He's on the lookout for seal, but he must also keep a wary eye for bears.
Trying to get close, sometimes it could take hours doing that. Females end up more round, like that. Took them about close to 2 hours to get to him. That's a lot of patience.
Mark takes time to study the polar bear's hunting prowess.
He's got very good senses of smell, good hearing, good eyesight.
Being close to a stalking polar bear, Mark and his friends know seals are not far away.
Appreciate you were still fresh.
Yeah.
Wily seals have survived constant pursuit by polar bears and are masters of escape.
Every time they pop their head up, I'll tell you to go down. We'll sit down, watch for a little.
Mark's friend Jodami Ikaluk uses a traditional Inuit blind, called a tuluaktut, to approach the seal. He's 40 meters away, but the seal is onto him. The seal is in its element, but out here, Mark has to be constantly aware of sudden weather changes.
Yeah, it's starting to look a little like the weather's picking up. Yeah. And plus all that ice crystals you see out there, that's indicating a storm or some wind picking up.
Mark is tuned to the island's weather. He understands how the ice behaves, how it's affected by winds and currents. He can predict where leads will open, and when he can walk out on sea ice 2 fingers thick and still be safe. Nowadays, Mark hears ice cracking more often during his trips and sees ice too thin to walk on. Mark wants to understand why the ice is changing. So he's guiding scientists who want to navigate Devon Island. Today, he's with Christian Haas, a professor of sea ice geophysics and electromagnetics at York University in Toronto.
Yeah, the ice...
Christian hopes to understand and predict the types of changes Mark has observed. He and his scientific team are measuring the sea ice around Devon Island.
So this is our electromagnetic ice thickness sounder, and it is a method that allows us to measure the thickness of the ice as we travel along.
The sounder sends signals through the ice to the seawater below, registering the ice's density. Christian can measure ice thickness more than half the length of Devon Island in a day. The amassed research of Christian Haas and other scientists shows that on average, sea ice across the Arctic has thinned by 13% since 1979. In some regions, Christian has documented changes that are even more alarming.
At the North Pole, for example, when I started my research, the ice was 2.5 meters thick, and now it's only about 1 meter thick anymore in the summer. So that is a lot of change we've seen.
There's another time-honored way to detect thin ice on the polar sea. The traditional sled dog can sense and avoid it. Most Inuit travel on snowmobiles nowadays, but they frequently still rely on their dogs for protection during a hunt or on long journeys. The breed is 4,000 years old and is as much at home here as polar bears and seals. A pack of dogs can fight off a polar bear. And when the wind whips up blinding whiteouts, they can guide travelers back home. The Inuit could not have survived here without their dogs. Not long ago, strangers came to these Arctic seas, lacking the life-saving knowledge they needed. For almost 400 years, explorers searched the icy waters for the Northwest Passage, a long sought-after trade route between Europe and Asia. They came here on one doomed expedition after another. They sailed in oak ships, 3 inches thick with iron bows to force through the ice, but it crushed the hulls. They brought new inventions, such as canned food, but it was not enough to beat the Arctic. They died from scurvy, tuberculosis, and the deep, unending cold. Many explorers passed by Devon Island on their way through the maze of Arctic ice and uncharted land. A passage was eventually found 100 years ago, but the route was so tortuous it had no commercial use. Now, their struggles would be easier, though still hazardous. During the summer, the warming climate is opening permanent channels in the Arctic Sea. Nations vie for the rights to these waters. Today's explorations seek undersea riches of oil and gas around this haven for polar bears. This once impenetrable region has become vulnerable. Off the northern coast of Devon Island, an iceberg continues its journey, moving south from the North Water Polynya. It's picked up by the Baffin Bay Current and floats south into the Atlantic, traveling over 16 kilometers a day. Some icebergs are glimpsed off the coast of the United States before they dissolve. Icebergs are the ice caps and glaciers set loose into the ocean. In recent years, more have been sliding into the polar seas. As glaciers recede, they're calving giants. Between 2010 and 2011, an iceberg 4 times the size of Manhattan roamed the Arctic Ocean. With each iceberg floating free, the sea level rises. Devon Island's ice, on land and sea, is becoming more unpredictable. The Inuit knowledge of ice in the Arctic, learned over thousands of years, no longer applies. Wildlife must adapt, if it can. From tiny drops of meltwater, to icebergs, to the oceans, the effects of climate change cascade. Research on Devon Island reveals that the fragile Arctic ecosystem has become unbalanced. The ice is dissolving year after year at faster rates. As more icebergs ply their course south, they carry this warning from the north.